Hi, everybody. Thanks, Dana. And thank you, Wayne. That was like a really great presentation and segue into this panel. So super excited to be here and see that we have a good group here on this virtual forum. You may have seen a lot of Will Rice's in the participants. That's because I actually shared Will Rice's link to this forum. And so we all changed our names now so that there aren't 5 Will Rice's in here. So sorry about the confusion. But really excited to moderate this panel to jumpstart, this really important topic of trends, visitation, management objectives. We have a great panel, Brad Jones of Alberta Environment and Parks, Locke Marshall from Waterton Lakes National Park, Dan McClure from Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, Chris Prew from the U.S. Forest Service, Jeremy Sage from the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research here at University of Montana, and Mary Riddle, who just recently retired from Glacier National Park. And I'm Jenn Thomsen. I will be moderating. I am a professor at University of Montana in the Parks, Tourism, and Recreation Management program and have worked with several of these folks on different projects in the Crown, and I'm really excited to expand our learning of what they see as big trends in visitation going forward. So how this panel is going to be structured is we are going to give each of the panelists about 5 to 6 minutes to share, to introduce themselves a little bit more formally and what they do. And then also they're going to share some overall kind of big takeaways, insights to kind of jumpstart us on this conversation. Once we hear from each of the panelists, I will then ask a series of questions to the panel about this topic. And then we will spend the last at least 20-25 minutes or so opening it up to discussion with everyone here in this forum to ask questions to the panelists or share their own experiences on these topics, because we know a lot of you here are obviously working in this context and have a lot of insight to share as well. So if you do have questions, you can either put them in the chat, but we probably will wait to get to them till the end, but I will make sure to keep track of time so that we make sure we have a good discussion and engagement at the end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of our first panelists. So let's start with Brad Jones from Alberta Environment and Parks, and he will get us going. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brad Jones. I work for Alberta Environment and Parks. I'm here in Calgary, and I'm just at the end or long end of a bit of COVID, so I might take the coffee now and then, but I'll try and get through my introduction. So my job is on public lands in Alberta. So my title is Recreation Manager, and the land base is mostly the Eastern Slopes is our focus, from the area around Edmonton and south to the US border. Well, we stop around the Castle Parks area. So the land base is mostly public land in that area. We have some big parks in Kansas and the Castle. We have a lot of small park sites that are often staging areas for public land. And the type of recreation we're managing is, well, everything. So public land, we're largely open to all types of recreation. So we have broad buckets of motorized and non-motorized, we call it. Includes hunting and fishing access, but just about anything you can think of occurs on public land in Alberta. The program is focused really on access and education. So we have enhanced or more facilitate recreation opportunities in Alberta that are in the parks system. And we just did a tune-up to our department to really reflect that parks is offering the more developed recreation opportunities. So one of the main mandates of the program is partnerships. So we use a lot of volunteer partnership organization. We have about 30 in our area that we work with, some really large ones just outside of Calgary, but we have lots of groups, motorized, non-motorized. Mountain biking is a big one these days, obviously. So right now we have around 13 full-time staff to do this on public land. We get some seasonal wage folks as well, but considering the scope of the land and the amount of activity, it's not a heck of a lot of people, but we're trying. So that's kind of what we sort of do, and just sort of the 3 or 4 key takeaways Jen said, I guess more for context for me without getting into trends. The big one really is on public land. We recently got back in what we call the business of recreation after probably several decades of not being active on public land. Goes back really to when forestries were in campsites. And we had a guardian program, and then all that kind of went away. A lot of the campsites became small campgrounds for Alberta Parks to run. And we haven't had a good presence outside of lands officers in a very thin enforcement program over the years. So recently it was declared that we're back in the business these past couple of years, and that's enabled a new program that I'm in now to stand up. So it's exciting days. However, during those decades, really, we had a lot of Albertans grow up in a culture where public land was a free-for-all. We've had politicians say it's open for business, do what you want to do out there, and it set a really poor tone. Unfortunately, it created a culture where it wasn't a lot of respect for public land. And this was enabled in Alberta by the oil gas boom. So suddenly we had folks growing up with a lot of money in their pockets and a lot of ability to buy lots of toys. And although there was, some level of regulation in place, it wasn't tightly managed. It wasn't enforced very much, and we ended up in a bit of a rough situation. And now trying to come around with education and engagement of folks, and trying to put a compliance framework in to folks understand that, driving your machine up and down a creek is not acceptable. Going building trails for your favorite mountain bike spot is not acceptable. We want to have some management to this. So history's not been on our side, but here we are, optimistic as ever. A big one for public land here in Alberta was COVID, and I'm sure it's come up a lot, but what we saw happen with COVID was that everybody stayed home, of course, everybody went outside, and then the parks closed here in Alberta. So all the parks users all went to public land with all the public land users, and suddenly we had a brand new demographic who realized that actually public land was pretty awesome, and there was a lot of really nice places to check out, and camping was free. So suddenly there was people everywhere, and there was poop everywhere. Well, there still is poop. It's under the snow right now, but we had really large problems with human waste management. It's a part of a key outcome, as funny and gross as it might be. And this, of course, all exacerbated with some of the themes that we just heard about from Wayne around the apps getting people out. All trails is a big one. All fails, as colleagues call it, getting people out to places that probably aren't ready to be, going for their Instagram photos, a lot of public safety issues. And then we had a very famous Facebook page here in Alberta called Crownland Camping. It quickly had 100,000 people on it in about a year. And suddenly you could go online and get information from a complete stranger with a little idea if it was actually true or not. So we engaged with these folks, and it's gotten a bit better, but it was an interesting exercise. And ask a stranger for questions around regulations. And maybe the last key point for us right now is we have a Trails Act coming in Alberta, which is exciting. So this government's going to bring in a Trails Act. We'll have some regulations. Really, the teeth that will be in our existing Public Lands Act. We have a recreation system up and running for public land, but this will really underpin it, give us some good tools and regulations, along with some fees. We've got a couple of recreation fees in place now for public land, which has enabled money to flow to operations and also giving money to partners to help them. And then the caveat with that, of course, is that suddenly we've created customers. Folks want something in return. So you even get, this is my favorite camping site. You guys got to go up there and clean it up and do a better job in the approach and stuff like that. So double-edged sword, but the future has gotten brighter with this Trails Act, and we're pretty excited. I think that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brad. Let's stay in the Canadian region for a bit, and let's go to Locke Marshall from Waterton Lakes National Park next.
Locke, you're muted.
Oh, Locke, you're muted there.
Let's try that again. I've just taken a page out of Wayne's book. They're starting out and getting a little bit of a head start and practicing before I actually am heard by the group. So sorry about that. Yeah, I'm Locke Marshall, Waterton Lakes National Park. I'm the Visitor Experience Manager. I have the advantage of having grown up in the ranch land just outside the park. So I've been kind of seeing the trends in recreation for the past 60 some odd years, as you can probably tell from the look of my face. But the interesting thing is that, some of the things that that Brad just mentioned, I've been seeing kind of around us. Waterton Lakes, being part of the National Park System, Parks Canada agency, has been a little bit isolated or insulated from that. But our basic philosophy, which goes back to our mandate, and I won't quote it for you, but it is basically allowing people opportunities to make connections to the place so that they then will understand the importance of preserving it. And I think that much as Mr. Friedman had talked about earlier, there was a bit of a disconnect for a certain time there, and there was some fear that people were actually moving away from being interested in those places, and that they weren't forming connections. Parks Canada was concerned about that, and I think we had a bit of a campaign to try to get people to understand what parks were about, and I think we're pretty successful. The interesting thing about that is we're most successful in the places that were already the most popular and already had kind of the highest visitation. So just to give you some context, in the early 2000 and 2010 teens, we were looking at a visitation in Waterton Lakes National Park of around 380 to about 400,000 per annum. By 2013, we started to see a real spike in that, and it was starting to increase quite drastically. There was a steady increase all the way to the culmination of that in our celebration year of Parks Canada, and that was in 2017 for Canada. So that was our 150th anniversary. We saw 578,000 people that year. So that was quite drastic. And then we had the Kootenai wildfire, and you guys are going to talk about climate change. If there was ever an event that kind of showed how that can change a landscape in a hurry, the Kootenai wildfire was it. But even then, the years following the Kootenai wildfire, even though there were things closed in the park, some areas you couldn't go to, a lot of our facilities had been damaged, we were still looking at 400 to 450,000 people coming per year. So it was obvious to us that trend was continuing. And in 2021, we had right around 526,000 people visit the park over the year. So it was it's been obvious to us for quite some time that that trend was continuing. We've taken measures to try to do some of the things that were suggested, where we had all kinds of communications efforts to try to persuade people to, come at different times of the year, try to spread out the visitation a little bit, try to involve some of our partners so that they could benefit from some of our visitation as well. That did work, and we saw it here as well as in places like at Lake Louise. My colleagues up north in the parks, seeing people, we had said, well, why don't you come earlier in the day or come later in the day? Well, they did, and we've seen that bell curve of when people arrive, instead of being in the middle of the day, has flattened out a bit, but it's still very high. So we're still getting high visitation, but it is being spread out over the people coming earlier, staying later in the day, and also in the season. So we're seeing that. All kinds of other strategies as well, traffic management, hiring contracted people to come and help us manage parking at certain areas, that type of thing. The other trend that we have really seen is that a lot of these folks are new visitors to protected areas, and their behavior is not quite the same as we were used to with our traditional visitors. And it brought to mind something, again, another advantage of someone who's been around a long time and who's a little bit older, but I don't know if any of the rest of you remember back in the 1970s and 80s, the big campaigns about, litter and all this stuff. It was really necessary because people had this idea that, like wild and protected areas, well, there was lots of space and they could do whatever they wanted there. Well, there was a big campaign and it was very successful. And in the maybe late 80s, 90s, we really didn't have to remind people too much. There was a really kind of a social ethic that you didn't do stuff like that. You didn't, throw litter around. You didn't, you behaved a certain way. Also the same with how we dealt with wildlife, garbage and bear management, that type of thing. So we had made that big campaign and then we kind of backed off a bit. Right now we're seeing though, that a lot of new visitors, again, they don't really understand or understand the impact of their behavior here. So they are not behaving perhaps in the way that we would like them to behave in a lot of cases. And so we're seeing a lot more litter, a lot more human waste issues like Brad mentioned, and a lot of behavior around wildlife that we're not too fond of. So again, it brought us back to the reality. We need to be glad that people are finding a way to connect and coming and are interested in these natural places. It's part of our mandate, but at the same time, we have to go back to some of the basics of try to inform them, educate them, and help them understand the importance of how they treat these places. So part of our new park management plan that's just now in draft form is getting close to being finalized, is to create a visitor use management strategy. And we'll be working with partners to try to come up with that strategy that will work for Waterton Lakes, which will still allow us to have people make those connections, allow the tourism industry to capitalize on the interest in those protected areas, but hopefully manage visitation in ways that make it so that the visitor experience is still a good one. Overall, we're getting anecdotally and during our last survey that people are fairly satisfied with their experience, but we're getting more and more comments about the crowding, about the litter, about things like that. So people are becoming concerned. So we're hoping that visitor use management strategy will help us build strategies that will perhaps manage crowding, but also manage behavior. So I think maybe I'll leave it at that, and hopefully some of my other colleagues will have some other points that they can make. Thank you.
Thank you, Locke. Let's hear from Dan McClure next from Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes.
Good morning, everybody. I'm kind of happy to hear that everybody else is having the same issues we're having. So my name is Dan McClure. I'm the Fish and Game Chief here at CSKT. My role in the conservation efforts is enforcement. We have a little over 1.2 million acres of tribal property, which is deemed private property owned by the membership of our tribe. We allow people to recreate on our lands so long as they purchase the conservation permit, and then any other fees they would like to participate in, such as fishing and or camping. And then our job is to go out there and enforce it. Make sure that people are in compliance with those fees and that they're following the regulations that we have set forth. So some of the issues that we are seeing, however, is with that whole COVID issue, we had a backlog of folks we called COVID refugees running from cities and trying to find a safe place to survive the pandemic. And we'd find them in our mountains and our camp areas and on roads that didn't exist before because they created one to get back into the trees and, things like that. So we ended up, the tribe, I shall say, ended up closing our reservation, our tribal lands during the height of that pandemic to everyone, that included the tribal membership. For a while, we weren't allowed to go on our property either because of it. We have since loosened the belt on that and reopened our lands to camping and whatnot. But some of the things that we did was we hired the fee amount to our camping and a little adjustment in our conservation. As Glacier Park had their adjustments, we've seen a backflow, if you will, of tourists that were stopping between Yellowstone and Glacier Park and then going through our valley and taking the All Trails map onto lake waters. And they would come to our signs where it would say, you need a conservation permit to access the lands. Well, they thought that applied to locals, not them. So they would continue on into doing whatever they felt necessary to do. So we've seen a lot of things like that during those times. And even today, we have a lot of education to explain to visitors that this is not state lands. It's not open and free to the public. There's a fee process, and the sign pertains to everyone who is not CS and KT enrolled. Usually we escort them back off the property and they show them where they can go buy permits, but typically they're just passing through, trying to get to Glacier Park because they arranged a camping location, but they can't be there until the next day or whatever. So we see a lot of that. We had a lot of field contacts during that pandemic time. We also had hired a bunch tribal member civilians that would sit on the roadsides of our access points onto our lands to check and make sure that people were in compliance. And if they weren't in compliance and they were asked to turn around and go to a permit vendor and purchase permits to return. However, we suspended camping and it was just a day visit type of a thing. I would say that most of the problems that we see now are people that are following their smartphones with their coolest app to get to bodies of water or whatever, or picnic areas, camping areas, and then in those media, there's no indication on there that it's private property or tribal lands. You need this or that. It's just a guy like, you know, I'm actually part of that app. I use it, but I also throw out my messages there that they need that permits. I tag on to other people's posts to let people know that you have to have a permit. But other than that, I would say that it's probably calmed down just a little bit, but we're still having a lot of people that don't want to pay the fees to be on the land. They'd rather just take the chance and get the fines. They feel as though sometimes the fines are less than the fees. Well, state of Montana changed their criminal trespass fee to up to $500 fines. And if you were to buy permits, if you lived outside of the reservation, it would be $200 to access our property. Locals pay $140, and that's still far less than a fine. So hopefully that discourages some use, because we certainly want people to utilize it, but we just want them to exercise the regulations that we give with them when they buy their permits, so they don't get in trouble, and that we can preserve what we have. We don't necessarily want to take lands away, but we have closed a few campsites just this year because our membership can't even utilize their own property. So we would go into a popular camping area where there's a couple lakes, small lakes, and it would last year and a half. It's been full with out-of-state RVs, and they wouldn't even have a permit, one, to be there. And that land was for our membership to utilize, and they would just ignore all signs to get there. So that's just some of what we experience. I'll be here until this is done and answer any questions that anybody has.
Thank you, Dan, bringing up a lot of really interesting challenges. So yeah, it'll be great to hear what others are experiencing and how they're dealing with that enforcement piece too. So let's move to the U.S. Forest Service perspective with Chris Prew.
Hey, how's my audio? Can you hear me? Awesome. My computer decided to go through a major update right when we were getting on here. Hey, so Chris Prew, I'm with the Flathead National Forest. I am the Recreation Program Manager responsible for program management in wilderness, wild and scenic rivers, trails, recreation special uses. So I work at the Forest Supervisor's Office, and the way for those of you who know or don't know, the way the Flathead National Forest, the forest is organized, we have 4 districts. And then they each have their recreation staff that help to manage the programs. Yeah, I mean, the Flathead Forest, I mean, I feel lucky in this position. We manage a lot of great things in recreation, wilderness with management in the Great Bear, Bob Marshall Wilderness, part of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. We're a 2.3 million acre forest. 1 million acres of that is wilderness. We have a lot of lot of use around the edges of the wilderness there, a lot of demand for that. We have a large trail system, over 2,000 miles of trails across the landscape, and yeah, just a lot of opportunity for recreation. Flathead Wild and Scenic River is what we manage, 200 Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. We have 219 miles of that river in the North Fork, South Fork, and the Middle Fork. Developed campgrounds, rental cabins. I mean, the big thing about the Flathead, I guess, is we have a lot of water, which we're lucky enough to have a lot of natural lakes, reservoirs. So you have a lot of water-based recreation, obviously the wilderness-based recreation. And then the other piece is the proximity to Glacier National Park. So we have going into like our trends, our visitation. I mean, we're seeing lots of that increase of use of folks heading to the park, similar to what folks had said. And as people get displaced from Glacier, they're wanting to look for areas to camp on forest. Our visitation, you know, just like everybody, we had the spike in COVID in 2020. And then as we went into last summer, you know, we saw less use than we did in 2020, but we saw some interesting trends, and I got hit on those as a lot of what other folks had said. You know, we're seeing more of the dispersed type of recreation and a lot more different type of visitors. You know, Dan mentioned displacement there of like the local tourists or local visitors to areas that they normally use, and seeing more out-of-state users in those used to be out of the way dispersed sites. We're also seeing it with our campground concession, campground management, and rental cabins. It's harder to make reservations for the sites that we have available. It's harder to be a last minute planner these days. You know, even planning 6 months in advance to try to get a campsite is a tough challenge. So we're seeing similar things there. Let's see, winter use, we're seeing the increases in winter use, whether it's ski area visits or backcountry winter use. That's starting to take its toll on, you know, just in how we educate and how we message with our avalanche centers. Some of the positive things, I guess, that I would see, you know, trends that we're seeing with increase in visitation. I mean, an increase is not always a bad thing. Opportunities for education and trying to work with our local partners, that has been really positive for us. We're doing a lot of engagement with our partner organizations to try to manage recreation and manage use and help us plan trail systems, project work in ways that we haven't done before in the Forest Service. So yeah, I will leave it at that as we go into the questions, and I don't want to jump too far ahead.
Thank you, Chris. Let's hear from Mary Riddle next, working with Glacier National Park.
Thanks, Jen. So as Jen said, I'm retired now recently as of the end of December. So thank you for inviting me to be on this panel, even though I am no longer technically a land manager, but I'm going to talk a little bit about my past, certainly at least 25 years with being at Glacier, as well as some earlier time. So I retired as the Chief of Planning and Environmental Compliance, and worked on, did kind of major plans for Glacier my entire career there, which included the general management plan, the rehab of the Going to the Sun Road, the Going to the Sun Road corridor plan, and left before we were able to finish the Flathead River plan with the forest. But and then numerous smaller plans in there. But I would say that visitor management was a key driver in every one of those planning efforts. So it very much became part of my the atmosphere I had to work within, and Glacier itself. The other thing I did at Glacier was facilitate with the University of Montana on the collection of visitor data, which we've have been collecting since about 2005. So we have quite a large bank of data to draw upon. And then I've been involved with the Crown Managers Partnership since it began, and am, like I said, super excited to be here as part of this forum, and thanks to all the committee for putting this together. I think the key messages I wanted to impart at this point is that, you know, I think you've heard from the other panel members the things that they were dealing with, which is definitely Glacier in spades, you know, more human waste, gridlock on the roads, a new generation, a new type of visitor with very little experience. Those are things we definitely saw occurring during, you know, I think in 2020, we really saw a lot of different behavior than we had seen before. People with a lot less experience of coming to national parks. But I think focusing on kind of where we're at now, it feels like a perfect storm with visitation exploding everywhere, and the stage is, I think, set for beginning to implement some visitor management strategies. And as you all are probably aware, we did that at Glacier last summer, but there were a number of other parks that did that the year prior, and then more following along this year as well. From an operations standpoint, I would say that visitor management can't be stovepiped or put into one division or program. It really affects the whole operation of a land manager's responsibilities, and it involves everybody at the park or forest to understand and help with implementation. The key areas, I think, in developing a visitor management program itself is how to operate it and fund it. But there's two big things with communication. One is it is so important to be talking with your community members and stakeholders and delegation about what you're trying to do and why. Have very clear objectives in speaking about it, and then communication with your own staff is also another really point, that activity that has to take place so that they understand the reason to be going this direction. So I guess I would say to close that, you know, Glacier has seen the same kinds of trends in high visitation. Wayne showed some graphs. We've seen a 40% increase since 2012. And interestingly enough, when I started the corridor management plan in 2013 and contracted with a socioeconomic firm to help us, we did some scenario planning on visitation and decided that we wanted to look at a scenario of a 50% increase. Identified that number as 3.1 million. And the economists at that time that were helping us said, oh, you'll never see this. You'll never see a 50% increase. That's like way out there, you know, not going to happen. Well, lo and behold, in 2017, that's exactly where we were at. So yeah, I think it's pretty noteworthy to say that those things that we never thought would happen are happening and will continue to happen. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary. And last but not least, I saved Jeremy's stage for last because he's not speaking. He's speaking from the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research, but not on a particular place from a land manager perspective, but more on speaking on the research that that institute is doing on bigger trends, maybe across Montana and the Crown. So I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy.
Great, thanks, Jen. As Jen said, I am Jeremy, and I'm currently the interim director of the Institute for Tourism and Recreation Research. My background is in economics. I am not, however, the economist that told Mary that we would not have that large of increase. So that's not my fault. Don't blame me. I'm not sure I would have predicted that either, but it wasn't me. And so I currently split my time right now between directing the institute here, as well as I'm transitioning into a new position with RRC Associates, one of our partners, to direct their tourism and visitor research. And so we do a lot of work, not only in the state, but across the US in socioeconomic research with the National Park Service. And as the institute here, we've been here at the University of Montana since 1988 and are funded out of the state lodging facility use tax to do research on visitation and tourism to Montana. And so a big part of that obviously is the attraction of all of our visitors to the state because of our national parks, our national forests, our wide open spaces, all these things that people routinely tell us as to why they come to Montana. And they do come in droves. Just prior to the pandemic in 2019, we had about 12.6 million visitors to the state of Montana coming and spending $3.7-ish billion in the state. So adding all that new money to the state. And by and large, they're coming to visit one of our two national parks or even both of those national parks. And that has not eased up in these last 2 years while we've been in the midst of this pandemic. In fact, one of the things we monitor often is that bed tax and how that is done and gone. And it had a pretty steady increase year over year coming out of the last recession in 2009. Took a pretty sizable dip in 2020 when a lot of the US shut down, not nearly as large as many other states. And then coming out of that, we actually saw a large jump in our lodging tax revenues. In 2021, summer of 2021, we were about 23% higher than we would have expected had we continued our usual trend line coming out of that. So that's a substantial jump in that lodging tax. And first thought might be, well, it's just because of inflation. Well, no, yes, we did have much higher average daily rates at all these places, and about 20% higher actually. But the US as a whole was down about 2%. So we were definitely far off of what those usual pieces are. So we had a large volume of people coming and staying in Montana and recreating in the outdoors. And so that's one thing we monitor routinely is that volume of people that come to the state, which kind of then gets us to the points that all these land managers have talked about. Is just this large number of new people that have come into the state and some of these behavior issues. I think Locke mentioned it, Chris mentioned it, Mary mentioned, everybody has mentioned these behavior issues that are out there, which then also stresses Montanans in general as well. And one of the things we routinely monitor is every year we issue a resident attitude study every winter. And we're looking at how Montanans feel about the tourism and the recreation economy in general. And one of the things we ask every year, we've done this since 2002, is asking if indeed the state is becoming overcrowded because of more tourists. And it's a pretty steady, common flat line of those people that disagree with that statement. It's about 70-75% people say, no, it's not too crowded, we're good. But in the last couple of years, that number of people that disagree with that statement has been steadily declining. And in fact, just this last year, we finally had that point where they cross, and more people are agreeing now with the statement that the state's becoming overcrowded than disagree. So that's a concerning piece, and that line definitely jumped considerably in 2021. On a same notion about if tourism were to increase in Montana, if the overall quality of life for Montanans would increase. And again, most people think, yeah, tourism is great, it's doing this well. But in the last few years, we've seen those lines cross and more concern being expressed. A lot of that is our perceptions of what crowding might look like right now as Montanans, and those perceptions in the midst of COVID that are there. Not surprisingly, one of the biggest areas where people are concerned is in that greater Glacier area. Those areas where we are most visited were those ones that were expressing the most concern about that. So while people are mostly still pretty positive about where we are with our tourism, there is some trends to be aware of and concerned with as we continue to have these increases in volume, in behavior, and changes. And so part of our responsibility too is not only monitoring who's coming to these open spaces, but how that interacts with the greater tourism economy itself. And so as places like Glacier institute a system to a permitting system on going to the Sun Road, how that is managed, how does that overlay with how tourism industry itself operates? We know that time again, when people are planning to come to a place like Glacier, they're making their reservations for their hotels or airline tickets 6 to 9 to 12 months in advance of that. And their primary pool for them is going to Glacier. So how do we operate within not only the park and park management, but the greater economy which within that that place sits, and how do we navigate that with our communities, those that are dependent upon tourism and those that influence tourism? We can definitely jump into more of all that as we go through all these questions and answers, but thank you all for having us.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to all of our panelists. I love all the different perspectives that have been brought to get us thinking about further questions. So as I mentioned, I have a couple questions prepared for the panel, and then we will open it up to the audience to ask questions, share experiences. So my first question for the panel, and anyone can kind of from the panel can jump in if you feel like you want to respond, is how do policies or regulations or trends in your state, province, and communities impact recreation management, maybe where you work? So kind of thinking about how kind of what's happening externally in your landscape and in your state and province is actually impacting where you are managing recreation.
I can go.
All right, great. Thanks, Brad.
I did think about this one. We talked about it yesterday or the day before. Interesting one for us in Alberta is federal species at risk legislation. So in this case, West Slope cutthroat trout. I know we have bull trout as well. So both species actually provincially and federally listed at some level, but the federal regulation for West Slope cutthroat trout in particular has changed the way we manage recreation, and particularly for our motorized trail systems, where we often would have no bridges. Machines were allowed to cross through the water bodies, and now we're very quickly changing that. So it really drives a lot of not just our management, but really where we put our investments. So the capital investments we've had, the money that we've gotten through the federal government for native trout recovery, for recreation lease goes to bridges. So we've been just really, the most of the work that my team does for actual construction and capital investment has been bridging all these watercourse crossings, and we're just at the tip of the iceberg. There is way more to go, and it's really put a flavor on a lot of our conversations on recreation. And the focus is definitely on motorized, but of course, you know, it does also pertain to other types of use, anything from equestrian and probably wagons maybe stick out more, but obviously bikes and feet have some effect as well. So it's really changed our conversation on public land, but you know, on Crown land here in Alberta. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. Anyone else from the panel want to respond?
This is Locke. I'll maybe jump in on that one. And it's kind of an interesting reverse of what Brad just said. Increased protection of the lands just north of Waterton Lakes National Park in Alberta from, you know, a wildland area, a provincial park that has taken place just in the last few years. I think, as Brad had mentioned, you know, there was kind of widespread, very open definition of how you could use a wilderness or a wild area in that area prior to that. And that change in legislation has probably made it more obvious to people who were in the area that this area that included, Glacier to the south of us, Waterton, Castle to the north of us, Akamina to the west of us, that, that kind of core area was actually part of an overall protected area, rather than looking at it as just one little place that had lots of restrictions on it and other places where you could pretty much do whatever you wanted. And I think it has changed some of the attitude that we see amongst, in particular, Albertans, but probably from people who come from other areas to visit those, on just what a protected area is all about. And I think that that is something we have that's a positive going forward when we try to educate people on how to use those areas, is it's a more cohesive management regime, I guess. So there you go.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, and I could jump in on this one and take it from a little bit of a different angle. I think that there's some local and federal activities occurring in the area of both, as Wayne talked about, EV and alternative transportation. And these offer some opportunities, I think, for federal agencies to be coordinating with their communities around them, and that may offer some benefits in that it allows those communities to perhaps take more advantage of federal dollars, as well as linking our protected areas with places that people are staying or coming from. Wayne mentioned the almost, I think it was 70,000 seats were added to the airlines this last summer. And interestingly enough, there were not enough rental cars in the area to support that increased visitation, even just coming into the airport, let alone the Flathead Valley or Glacier. So it was, those kinds of things are what I think protected areas need to start paying attention to and offer some options.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I think a lot of us experienced that shortage of rental cars for sure. So my next question for the panel is, how is information technology and apps like Strava, All Trails, Instagram, maybe even some of the ones that I think a couple people mentioned earlier, are changing recreation use, but also the communication around recreation and with recreation users?
Maybe I'll jump in first on that one. Just a real simple answer to that one. Areas that we always knew had some form of recreation, but tended to be local, kind of expert knowledge kind of areas that didn't really have a designated trail, that we didn't really promote as someplace people should go. We always thought that, the level of kind of local expert recreation in those areas was definitely acceptable. And now we're seeing that, of course, because they're being advertised not by us, but by some of those other users that are utilizing those apps and social media, that they are all of a sudden becoming almost like designated trails because they're being utilized. And then the added concern that some of those users are not prepared to recreate in those areas. They don't have the expertise or the equipment, nor do they understand kind of the precautions they have to take. So that's just a simple answer on how that works.
Thank you. Anyone else want to respond?
I can just add a little bit from the perspective of information that we collect and looking at where people that are traveling are getting their information from. And I think this creates a challenge for land managers and destination management organizations as well, in terms of controlling the information that is out there. People tell us more often than not that they're getting their information from a social media platform, a Facebook, a Twitter, a TikTok, from those friends and families. Information that, as we are well aware, the broader social life isn't always all that great quality. Let's put it that way. That there's always those issues that are there. So the challenge becomes, how does that message become controlled and understood and truthful and accurate? Becomes a bigger issue as we start to think about information exchange around issues around fire and what to do when fire is in a region or other kind of disaster type information portals that are out there. Understanding those information sources, where people are getting their information from, who people are trusting in that, and in their planning as well. This becomes a pretty substantial factor. People are going to these other sources as opposed to direct to the land manager themselves, for better or worse.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I believe, Dan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so added to this social media advertisements of trails and whatnot, some of the things that we see, we have a big wilderness along the Mission Mountains that have some trails on there. And then what we are seeing now is some of these apps, you're able to plot your route from point A to point B. Sometimes those routes that people take aren't registered trails, if you will. They're game trails, and people follow those as the app is plotting their route, and next thing you know, you got other people following that same route. So it opens trails that we do not maintain or really allow people to be in because of some issues where, from personal experience, responding to calls at 12 in the morning because someone from Oklahoma got lost because their phone went dead. And so there we are up there trying to get them out, and so those are some of the things that we're seeing. So when people are utilizing those apps, they're not getting the full information. And sometimes they're being routed by people who just are more adventurous and able to do so. So just to add that on there for the social media stuff, it gets a lot of people in trouble.
Thanks, Dan. Any other comments from the panel, or we'll move to a new question?
Just real quick, added some of the similar things on the forest with, the boondocking apps or camping apps that folks are using that, taking people to places that are kind of like Dan said, but not with trails, but with dispersed camping that maybe are not the best locations. But some positives too with apps like Trail Forks, where we've had the challenges of non-system trails showing up and trying to message that. We've also seen some outcomes where, working with partners on community trail systems and using those apps to identify with, the folks locally who use some of those routes, potentials to add to our system, potentials to work with partners on creating new trails. So we've had some really good conversations around a community Whitefish and Columbia Falls on trail systems that the Forest Service has been working on. So, positives and negatives definitely come with some of that information that we wouldn't have had without some of those apps.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm going to kind of do a two-parter question, and the panel can respond to either part or both. What are some new forms of recreation that have changed the way you manage your lands or water? That can be like e-bikes, drones, pack rafts. I mean, things I've never even probably heard of. And then also the second part of that question is, do you think that there are changing expectations of visitors that you're seeing, as a trend overall, and what that can be, you can share maybe your interpretation of that. So new forms of recreation, and then also any changing expectations of visitors.
I think from my perspective, it's funny, we talk a lot about e-bikes, which are obviously very new, but really the proliferation of mountain biking is still relatively new. And here in Calgary, it's a huge thing. What we're finding is suddenly everybody is out and wants a new trail. So a lot of new trails being cut, unauthorized, a lot of structures, technical features being built that are sketchy at the best of times. So it's still like, I'd say in the last 10 years, this has really blown up, and, e-bikes part of that, the fat tire bikes. Then for management is then to provide the opportunities. So on public land, we need partners to do that. We don't do that in government Alberta. We have some really great places right now in Crosses Pass and around Calgary, Rocky Mountain House, Nordic. So we're lucky in that regard, but all partner run, but there's still a desire for more and, expectations there to provide it. So we're trying to figure it out. We've actually done 3 of our probably most recent trail plans are all around mountain biking, and Peggy here today and part of the organizers has been key in developing those plans for us. So it's interesting. The demand is increasing here as we move along, but it still feels like we're that wave of just mountain biking, size your tire and your whether the E or not aside is still raising here. And on public land, we're challenged to provide enough opportunities for folks.
Thank you, Brad. Anyone else from the panel?
I can go, Jen. I think some of the new forms of recreation that we're seeing are certainly the e-bikes that everybody's mentioned. Also pack rafts, which are creating a difficulty with being able to inspect them for AIS, or aquatic invasive species, before they're put on lakes in the backcountry. And then kite sailing was a new form of recreation for Glacier, particularly on the east side, became very popular and required us to kind of think creatively about how to allow for that while not affecting the resources. And I think that's one of the points I guess I also wanted to make about that, even with these new forms of recreation, as well as increased visitation, that we have to remember for many of our protected areas, one of our primary missions is to protect those resources for generations. So that is really the crux of why recreation management has to occur in order to protect those resources. So, and then the other thing that we're seeing is a expectation of connectivity, particularly in developed areas that are really kind of more in the interior of Glacier, but also there's some interest in connectivity kind of throughout the entire park. And Glacier's tried to address that by increasing connectivity just in developed areas. But there is this, whether you want to call it the me generation or what, they want to post right away where they are and talk about that and share that with everybody. So there's that expectation that we've had to work with.
Thank you, Mary.
I think in terms of demand and expectation as well, seeing all those posts of people with their stand-up paddleboards in a certain destination creates and drives that demand for more people, which then also creates an expectation, rightly or wrongly, that those opportunities, those pieces of equipment will be there on site, ready for you to use as well. So we've heard increasing complaints from visitors about, well, I got here, I drove all the way here from Oklahoma again, since they got lost up there in Dan's group. They get here, like, I came here to stand up paddleboard. There's nowhere to rent a stand up paddleboard. Like, well, you should have brought your own stand up paddleboard. But so there's that increasing expectation of these new recreation types being out there and available, and people that are trying it for the first time, and getting in over their head oftentimes as well. So.
Thanks, Jeremy. So my final question, then we'll turn it over to the questions. I know some people are putting them in the chat, but we'll allow for more of an open forum with our participants, is a lot of you spoke to some trends that you're seeing already. So I wanted this last question from me to be any other trends in the past 10 years that you that you haven't already talked about, and also any trends that you're anticipating. And this maybe dovetails into some of the things that Wayne had talked about, what we should anticipate going into the future for recreation management in the Crown.
Ms. Locke, I'll jump in now on that one again. One thing that has been surprised me, and maybe this isn't really what you're asking, but I'll throw it out there anyway, because we are talking about economic benefit, and we're hoping that that economic benefit spins to the business people who are in the area. We're finding that anytime that we've done anything that tries to alter the visitation or in any way restrict visitation, the business owners are somewhat concerned that will impact them. They're seeing in some cases, while we're seeing an increase in visitation, they're seeing a drop in who's coming to their shops and their restaurants and that type of thing. And I think that one of the trends that I've seen is that the typical restaurant, the typical gift shop, kind of the typical thing that we thought was what everybody would want when they're in an area that has a protected area, is not necessarily attracting the new clientele. And I think that it's going to be a challenge for people who are in the business sector to try to meet that challenge, where they actually meet the expectations of the people who are coming, which seem to have changed drastically over the last decade or maybe more. So anyway, just a trend that I've noticed that maybe was not the right response to that question, but it is kind of an interesting one if you're talking about economic benefit or tourism.
Thanks so much, Locke. Anyone else want to share?
Yes, just two maybe quick points. Back to e-bikes, which doesn't hit the radar too high in public land. In most cases, it's whether they're considered motorized or not, that they're open to motorized conveyances. So it doesn't really hit our radar. But the continuation of the technology advancement into bigger, faster, more powerful e-bikes, and then the change probably in the current motorized machines, dirt bikes and OHVs turning electric as well, I think it's going to change things. And our biggest challenge, of course, is policy and regulation, keeping up with it. We looked at Alberta Parks here in the province to lead on this. I know they're struggling to keep up with it, but we can never turn fast enough. And in public land, we have misalignment with federal and provincial regulation, which doesn't help at all. Then the other comment I just want to make was, it popped to mind, a more recent trend was the overlanding. So get yourself a Toyota and put a tent on the top and go wherever the heck you want. And it obviously ties into the Instagram side of things, but we're definitely, everybody stayed home during the pandemic, especially proliferated as well with money in your pocket. So buy yourself your vintage Toyota, get your tent and go for it. And definitely a bit of a swagger with this demographic as well, of getting out there and not so much getting themselves in trouble, but probably going to places where they shouldn't be and not knowing where the park boundary is, provincial or federal in many cases. And then it's nothing like a TV commercial to underpin it when you see as I saw recently, was a Hyundai, some Hyundai SUV ripping up the creek. And, it's a great example of these folks to keep going further and deeper back. But it's definitely something that we're not too sure what to do with if we can find these folks. But it's usually the wheels in the water, which is the biggest problem for it. Thanks.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, just jump into one of the, in the last 10 years for river use. I mean, obviously pack rafting has been something that we've seen quite a bit of on the South Fork of the Flathead and other rivers in wilderness. And then, there's just an overall trend in the traditional uses are tending to tail off. We're seeing like these different type of uses. And in wilderness, in particular, we're seeing more day use, like in Panhandle, the Great Bear, more of that front country use. There's others on the call here, my colleagues who also manage wilderness. They can maybe give some insight on the deeper wilderness uses, but overall, we're kind of starting to see that. And then, use in the shoulder season, I think, is something that we struggle with as managers, because it's harder for us to staff up to be able to have the people on the ground to manage those uses. Early season or late season, we're starting to see that creep a little bit more too.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, well, unless there's any other comments from the panel on that question, I think let's go to some, up questions from the audience. So there's going to be two ways you can ask questions going forward. If you're in the audience, you can raise your hand using the raise your hand feature at the bottom, and then you can ask your question verbally, or if you prefer to put your question in the chat, I will also kind of try and balance going back and forth between those. So let's start with Jack Rich raised their hand. So we'll start with you, Jack, if you want to ask your question.
Yes, my question would be for Jeremy Sage. And Jeremy, with your capacity in the Department of Tourism, you're trying to maybe do a little bit of forecasting by using the present and the past to help businesses as well as resource agency folks better manage the resource and care for people. We've seen some recent phenomenon here that I'd like to hear you maybe give some insight on. Three things in general. One is that little bedroom communities like the one I live in, sometimes their perception of non-residents include people who come here from Missoula and Kalispell and Helena and Great Falls for the weekend. And they can't delineate between them or a non-resident from Oklahoma. To them, they're all non-residents. And so it changes their perception some. The second is the phenomenon of the VBRO, or vacation rental by owners, which traditionally when people came from out of the area, they stayed at campgrounds or hotels or motels or resorts or guest ranches. Now they're coming to stay in the house that you live right next to you. They come and they stay in your house for a week, and then next week it's a new face. And there's a little bit of unrest and uncertainty as those residential areas become the area where folks come from anywhere and stay for a week and rent a house. The third one then would be as the other thing that we've seen happen just most recently is that now all of a sudden people aren't just interested in coming out here to recreate, they want to buy. And so there's been a huge spike in real estate prices, and correspondingly it's making it less and less affordable for people who try to live in these, who are trying to make a living in these small gateway communities to be able to live here. They're being displaced. So I wonder if anything in your tourism and recreation surveys has addressed those three issues, and whether you see it, whether I'm just seeing it here in my little local town, or whether it's more within the state of Montana, or I even ask our neighbors who are on the adjoining indigenous lands or the provinces, whether they're seeing those kind of phenomenons too.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Those are all three outstanding and deep questions. I think we could use an entire panel just on those three itself. Definitely issues that we've been taking a look at the last couple of years. For anybody that's on here right now, if you go to our website at itrr.umt.edu, we have a handful of studies that address several of these questions, or at least are tangentially related to those. But the first one I'll tackle is that the VRBO, Airbnb, short-term rentals of the world, and those are definitely having a significant impact on the tourism industry, on the housing industry itself, on Montana in general. And we have seen, so we did a study in 2020, 2021, and pulled data from 2000, where we saw that that as of September of 2000, there were over 12,000 short-term rentals that had been active in Montana at some point during that previous 12 months. So that's a substantial amount of housing units or cabins or yurts or whatever it might be that are up and available for short-term rental of some sorts. That doesn't necessarily mean that those are dedicated to short-term rentals. That could be someone that rents out their room on occasion when they're gone, or it could be an entire house that is there. But that does definitely play into Montana's housing market itself. We don't have exact numbers or good estimates on what that exact contribution is, but we know it does play an effect on there. We do know that there are a lot of people that are speculating, buying houses for that goal of understanding what, or of gaining from that market that's there. And so in that study we did in 2020, we talked with a handful of entities around the state to identify what it is they're doing to try and get a handle on the short-term market? Are they implementing any policies in their community? Are they considering it? Do they see it as an issue? And we reached out to other communities as well to try and, or outside of the state, to get an understanding of what they're doing as well. There's areas in the greater Colorado area that are, a bit ahead of us on this and have taken these into consideration in understanding what kind of volume of STRs they want to have available in their community to make sure they're able to maintain adequate number of rental units for long-term rentals or the housing market itself. And something we've been seeing in Montana, to address your third question about people buying that are here, we've been seeing this for a while already in terms of people that are moving to Montana to get away from those Seattles, those San Franciscos of the world. And the whole Zoom town phenomenon was in Montana prior to COVID hitting, but it came in droves more so in the last 2 years now, and has really contributed to that upward pressure on the housing market itself. So those people coming in have a big impact on that. And I mentioned earlier about the perception of overcrowding occurring in the state from Montana residents. And we got a lot of anecdotal comments that it's not necessarily the visitors that are coming to the state. It's these new people that have moved to the state as a direct result of this, which creates that increased frustration and animosity among residents that have already been here. And then lastly, to address your first question about it's not just out-of-staters coming into the state, but also Montanans traveling around as well, which we did see a lot of that, especially during COVID, as that distance of travel dwindled down. We saw state parks across the state really increasing in their volume. And a lot of that was residents getting out and recreating outdoors in their own communities or in neighboring counties. So there's a lot of in-state travel and motion in there that we don't always account for when we're talking about non-resident travel, but it's definitely a big piece of the Montana tourism. And we do have, I think, a 2018 study that talks about where people in Montana are moving about and traveling to still in Montana. So that data is out there as well. And there's a pretty good chance that that'll increase in this next year as well, as we see gas prices just continuing to skyrocket. As we speak, it's probably gone up 10 cents. But as gas prices get higher, your willingness to travel declines a little bit. We're not super elastic in that, but as we have really high gas prices, Montanans may not travel out of the state as much and maybe doing more in-state travel. So you might see, whether you like it or not, Jack, more Missoulians up in your area.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. So I have asked the panelists if there are some questions that you can respond to in the chat, because I want to make sure we can try and address as many questions simultaneously. So you can actually respond in the chat if you have comments or questions there. Locke, are you responding to one of the questions in the chat?
Actually, I was going to respond to one of Jack's questions there.
Okay, I do want to, maybe you can respond to Jack in the chat. I just want to make sure we have some time for some other questions, if that's okay. Great. Thank you. So it looks like we do have a question from Kelly Cooley in the chat about the types of tools like cameras that maybe can be used to monitor visitation on trails and remote destinations that we may be seeing increases in use, or use that's maybe not supposed to be occurring in those areas. So can anyone speak to if they've done that, or if you think that that could be a useful way of monitoring new areas of use in your recreation areas?
I guess as a fellow Albertan, I'll answer to Kelly. I'll give you the quintessential land manager's answer as well, that it's, it's a resource dependent thing, because putting the cameras out can be resource intensive. Our experience has been mixed. We need good buy-in from enforcement agencies. I mean, one thing to monitor, that's okay, but really, at least from my perspective, it's about compliance. So we need good enforcement buy-in to do that. That if we're going to do it and we're going to loan resources to it, that we want them to use the image that were captured and hopefully be able to make charges and press charges. And we've had mixed results with that. So been fairly reserved now in doing that again. But it's ideal because it's not a bad way of doing business if you can do it.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Dan, you have your hand raised.
We have thought about entertaining that idea with the cameras. It's a matter of getting the camera to have service to show us what's going on in those locations, and just posting that property that there could be surveillance in the area. What we're doing now, or what I am doing, is I am requesting from our tribal council an additional staffing for our fish and game department. Right now we're only of 9 people. We have nine wardens and 1.2 million acres to enforce and check out. So I'm searching for funding for 10 additional staff so that we can be out there where the folks are, not rely on that tech so much.
Thank you, Dan. So we do have another question in the chat from Sarah, asking about what kind of cross-jurisdictional communication planning is happening around recreation and recreation development, as opposed to individual agencies responding to visitation pressure.
Jen, I can speak to that somewhat, but I answered Sarah in the chat. But also, I think one of the Park Service, speaking as much as I can for the Park Service being retired, is that while we were working on visitor management for Glacier in the last couple of years, we were coordinating with parks all over the country that were also doing some type of visitor management and trying to learn from, you know, their experiences and how we could improve upon that. Additionally, we started last summer during the program up at Glacier. We were meeting with all the other land managers around the park. I don't know if it was weekly, I can't remember now. It was pretty frequent, and talking about the issues that they were encountering and how we might be able to help each other kind of with that effort. So I would say, you know, again, you can't do this by yourself. It is not the protected area's responsibility to do it all. It has to be a community effort. So I think the other note I made in the chat is that Glacier is starting to look at doing a long range plan on visitor management, but it's in the very, very early stages. So.
Thank you, Mary. It looks like Mike, you have your hand up to ask a question.
I do. Thank you. Hey, so I have this question for Chris. So Chris, although we're colleagues, we have this big rock between us called the Continental Divide. And most of our work together is related to wilderness in terms of stewardship of that protected area. But I'm referring back to Wayne Freeman's earlier presentation, looking at Flathead County and the growth that's happening there, especially for Kalispell and whitefish. Are you seeing a lot more requests for further development through special use permits that are existing in the more developed sites on the forest, on the Flathead, as well as new requests? Just want to get a picture of that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in Mike, in development, you mean just requests for use, or sites?
Well, actually sites, because you have quite a few lodges, resorts around the edges. And I thought you were seeing a lot more development requests coming in.
You know, it's some, I mean, most of our requests are coming from people moving here who have a great idea and wanting to have, you know, provide this new outfitter experience. I mean, I think when you have folks looking for access to the forest, you know, there is some of that need for new developed sites. But yeah, nothing in particular like we need these new sites here or there. It's just more demand on our existing sites and things that we have out there.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So we have a question from Maggie in the chat. Has there been any conversations around how management agencies can work with map app makers to help push to the recreate responsibly message?
Yeah, this is Dan. So I answered Maggie, kinda try to do two things at one time, but I know our mapping folks here have reached out to those other who was it? Onyx Maps out of Missoula, places like that, and trying to attach some sort of message that when they're here, there's special requirements for out recreationalists to be on. So we're trying to reach out to those folks. Also, just since I'm here, I know that our NRD department also had meetings with realtors in the area, trying to get the message out to potential buyers that where they're moving to isn't free reign, that there is other responsibilities here. So we're taking steps in other directions that we've never done before because of the flow of folks that are coming here to buy property and live. So just throw that in there too, since I was here. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say it's a mixed bag. Here in Alberta, our parks colleagues work with some companies directly. They have so we're looking for editor privileges. I think that's on Trail Forks. We have other companies come to us and ask to help edit their products, which is awesome, very helpful. But when you get more into the all trails type situation, things get more challenging. We do have a plan this year to address it, especially as our Trails Act comes in. We have even another type of trails designation come on. It's just getting more complicated, and government tends to, at least my government tends to do a poor job with this kind of stuff. So we do actually depend on other providers for information, and then controlling that is a challenge. So I mean, I think we all summed it up. This is one of the main challenges, but it's also a key tool, and find that middle ground. Can't always control it. We kind of need it from my perspective. We're not going to do the apps ourselves here. So finding out how to do that is a challenge we're going to try and attack here in 2022.
Okay, we have a question from Connie in the chat. How are agencies addressing the proliferation of motorized recreation and their expectations of larger landscape presence for desired user experience, and that impact on non-motorized recreation needs, as well as on conservation values?
Connie, I assume you're not talking to me, are you? Connie's been part of a lot of planning we've done in recent years around this topic.
Yes, and there's still a lot of questions outstanding regarding how do we actually address conservation needs as well as the non-motorized recreation needs. As you know, Brad, we have major, and including the new provincial trail system, which is apparently going to look at just motorized trails for designation at this point, right? So the question that I have is, how do you actually look at the needs for non-motorized recreation, which are the majority of users in Alberta and our visitors? And also, how do we actually dovetail perhaps quiet areas for non-motorized recreation with conservation needs perhaps as being an answer to that question? So a little bit nuanced, obviously, but really am interested in your response. That'd be awesome.
I'll give you a quick answer. I don't know if other folks from other jurisdictions, it might be great to give them some perspective. The provincial trails are for all types of use, Connie. You'll see non-motorized and motorized in there. And then I guess the big answer, and a good chunk of planning branch from my department's on here, but it's through good planning, and which have you been part of for years. So for Alberta, we have motorized recreation managed in our public land use zones for a lot of Southwest Alberta. And then to address the desire for more, and then to partition types of recreation, we'll have to do that through planning and through stakeholder engagement. So which you've been quite a bit a part of. So yes, that's the only solution right now. And then, the politics of the day aside, that's our way to get through at this point.
Well, I think the concern, Brad, as you well know, is the extra proliferation and maybe the perception that one type of motorized user is heard more than others. And so there is concern there. And it's definitely a management thing to look at in the future.
Yep.
Especially in Castle Parks. If we're taking a look at conservation values as well as non-motorized recreation needs for local communities and economic diversification, how are we addressing the need for those folks, as well as, addressing the influx of pressure from motorized recreation into these protected areas. That is a big question for us at this point.
Thank you, Connie. And I just put in the chat, since we started a little bit late, we are going to have an extra 5 minutes in this session. So if you do have other questions, you can raise your hand or put in the chat. You'll also notice that several other participants have responded, for instance, about the use of cameras. And so any other strategies that anyone wants to share, you can also put those in the chat from some of the questions. I'd also like to open it up in general, just on the bigger topic of this panel. If anyone in the audience wants to share their perspectives on trends, visitation, management of recreation, we'd welcome your input. So you can also raise your hand or use the chat function. Not seeing any raised hands or additional questions in the chat. So maybe
just a couple of things if no one else is gonna
sure, go ahead, Jeremy.
About some management opportunities for monitoring and awareness of what's going on. Wayne mentioned earlier in his talk about just how ubiquitous cell phones are of visitors and users. I think his data showed the Bryce Canyon results. We see that among Montana visitors. We were in Zion 3 times this last year, and pretty much everybody has a cell phone with them. And a large number of them have their location tracking enabled, even if they don't realize they have it enabled. And so the utility of mobile location services, companies like Near that can generate ping information pretty readily, even in rather remote areas, is increasingly open to exploration analysis about where people are going, when they're going. Some pretty cool information coming out of looking at last summer's going to the Sun Road and what that impact had, and just the change in how people move about in and around the west side of Glacier. The change in when they're going to the Sun Road and trying to get around that time period of when that permit is required. So there's a lot of new information that could be gleaned from mobile location data that also includes apps like Strava that you're tracking your entire route. And you can see those little hotspots of where people are going, even if it's not on an identified trail. So yeah, you can put a camera out there about on your trails, but if they're not on those trails, can you capture information about that? And those kind of apps and location device services can help that. It certainly is harder in more remote areas, but there's at least some opportunity out there. So those are things that we're exploring opportunities to look at moving forward.